Welcome to a new edition of DIY World Improvement. I'm your host, Catherine Carlozzi. Today is Groundhog's Day. If you're a backyard gardener, you may not be so fond of the furry varmints, but they probably aren't your only problem. I suspect you found yourself overrun by rhubarb or with squash to squander. Well, stay tuned because today's do-it-yourself world improver, Gary Oppenheimer, has the answer to your overabundance issues. Back in the day, Gary was a self-described computer geek involved with sales and support for MCI's fledgling email service. Remember, once upon a time, there wasn't email. He was a big deadhead back in the day, and he also produced what may be the very first e-zine while living and working from a boat in the Hudson River. About 10 years ago, Gary moved to the Garden State, traded his boat hook for a hoe, and took up gardening. His new passion led him to become a Rutgers Master Gardener and complete the school's Environmental Stewards program. 3 years ago, Gary had an epiphany that resulted in the founding of AmpleHarvest.org. Ample Harvest addresses the growing issue of food insecurity by linking America's 40 million-plus home gardeners with food pantries. As a side benefit, it helps reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the waste stream, and the American waistline. Gary has received bushel baskets full of accolades. Among others, he's been named a CNN Hero and was a recent guest of the White House. A frequent speaker, he was featured at the TEDx Manhattan conference, Changing the Way We Eat, on January 21st. Gary, welcome to DIY World Improvement. We're delighted you could come to the studio today.
Thank you very much for that lovely lead-in.
Tell us how a guy who lived on a boat in the middle of the Hudson River up there at the 79th Street Boat Basin reached that aha moment that resulted in creating AmpleHarvest.org.
It actually started a long time before that. In the 1950s, when I was a young child, my grandmother kept on saying, "Finish what's on your plate, kids are starving in Europe." So from an early age, I was attuned to the need not to waste food and that other people were suffering from the lack of food. And I've always grown up hating waste. And that's just been through my life, whether it's wasted time, wasted energy, wasted food, or wasted money. But the AmpleHarvest.org itself came about in two phases. One is when myself as a master gardener, having my own gardens at home, grew more food at a certain point than we could use. My wife reached a point where she said, "Don't bring any more of that in the house." And so I went out looking for where can I donate the food to. I knew there was a battered women's shelter in our town. I'm in West Milford, New Jersey. So I contacted them and said, "Would you like some produce?" And they said, "We'd love it." So I took it over there, and a lady answered the door, and she took the stuff. And she was very gracious about it, and she said, "Thank you." And as I'm walking away, she says, "This is great. Now we can have some fresh food." And I thought that was a very odd thing for someone to say. It never crossed my mind that fresh food was something that they wouldn't normally have. A year later, I went back to the same shelter. I also had more food than we can use. I gave her some more. Same lady answered the door and same comment. So I started to become aware of the fact that food pantries and shelters don't have fresh food. Jump forward a year, in 2008, the folks at Sustainable West Milford, who run the community garden in West Milford, New Jersey, asked me to take over the directorship of the community garden. It had been around for 2 years previously. The woman who created it was going on to other endeavors, and I said, "Sure, I'll be happy to." So in meeting with the people in late '08, just to get the feel of the garden and meet the people, they said, "You know, it's really frustrating at the end of the year. There's a lot of food left in the garden. People are going on vacation, they get bored, they get overwhelmed," and this just rolled off my tongue. I said, "You know, if we have an ample harvest, the least we can do is give it to people who need it." I had no idea where that was going to take me. So they loved the idea. They set about to put a committee together to organize it, and I set about, as the director of the garden, to find places in town to donate the food to.
Yeah.
I went on Google, which is what any geek would do, and found out that Google said the nearest food pantry was in Morristown, 25 miles away. I knew my town had food pantries. Google said it didn't know of any, and that's when it dawned on me in March of '09, if I can't find the food pantries, that means millions of other...
Nobody else can.
Exactly. And I just had this idea. The next morning, I got up, I registered the domain AmpleHarvest.org, spent that $9, and then I had to figure out what's next.
And what was next? You spent your $9 and you had the idea. How did you grow it? And what were the challenges you faced in doing that?
Well, the first thing I did is, again, I hate waste, so I didn't want the $9 to have been for naught. So I knew I had to do something. And there was no road in front of me. I was in virgin territory. Nobody had ever done this before. This is sort of like somebody, when Jeff Bezos invented Amazon.com. Nobody had ever done that before either. He had to come up with that whole idea. So I sat down and did basically an outline of what I thought a website might look like. And mind you, my web design skills are on par with most third graders. They were terrible, but it just gave me an outline. And I realized as I was doing it, and I did it in PowerPoint first, that it was coming together in my head very quickly what was needed, what it could do, and how it would have to be built. I then realized this was well beyond my own skill capability as a web person, so I found two people to help me out. One is a woman in Missouri who is an amazing web designer, and another was a gentleman here in New Jersey, and the three of us basically designed ampleharvest.org. She did mostly the front end, which is what people see.
Right.
He did the back end, which is the data engine, and I did all the content. So anything that involves words is me, anything that's pretty is hers, and anything that's structural is his. So we went from my having this epiphany in March to designing it, testing it, and rolling it out in 7 weeks. And it was that fast because in part I had no lawyers involved at the time.
I bet you do now.
Yeah. These were dedicated people. I mean, in the middle of the project, her mother took ill and passed away. And I was afraid, okay, we're going to fall behind my schedule. And it turned out this was so important to her that in the week between her mother's passing and the funeral, she kept working on it. I would have never asked anybody to do that. I was really moved by that.
Yeah.
We launched 3 days after I had hoped to have it launched.
How does ampleharvest.org work?
Think of it as a Google for food pantries. Food pantries across America register themselves. This is an opt-in thing. They register themselves on ampleharvest.org, and they put in their information, and they make themselves findable by gardeners and other people across the country who never knew they existed. Effectively, they've turned on the porch light to say to the neighborhood, we're here, we're in your neighborhood, and we really could use your help. And then the growers, the gardeners, actually use it like you'd use a Google, almost like a search engine. And then once they find the pantry, they deal directly with the pantry.
And talk a little bit about how that works. Okay, I was with a friend recently who has a garden and said, I had all this extra food, I didn't know what to do. In the interim, I found out about you, and we started talking, and I called her up and I said, I found out what you do with your Ample Harvest. So I'm a home gardener, and I go online just trying to figure out what to do. I stumble on Ample Harvest. What happens next?
You go to ampleharvest.org. You will click on the button that says Find a Pantry. You will put in your address or your zip code, and a list of food pantries that are registered on ampleharvest.org will appear in distance order from you. You then find the one that's most convenient to you. You click on that. The details the pantries put in, their address, their phone number, and most importantly, the days of the week and times of the days they want delivery. That's really critical in this application. It comes up, and then you deal directly with them. We don't touch the food.
Right.
So while we've built this connection in the neighborhood, we're actually not a part of that transaction. That's a really important thing. This allows the community to make itself stronger without us having to have people in the community. So our cost of operation is really low because we're not putting people across the country. We're using the internet to solve hunger rather than actually moving food around ourselves.
Basically, you're acting as a kind of broker.
You can think of it that way, yeah.
People who have and people who need. Perfect market.
Yeah.
If I'm a food pantry, or let's say a soup kitchen or whatever, because I know you do have some of those on your list, how do I become part of the campaign?
You simply go to ampleharvest.org and you click on the register button key and you put in all your information. It's very simple. And by the way, some important things for pantries. Number one, it's free. Number two, they don't need internet. Number three, they don't need storage. And number four, it's free. The free part's really super important to the pantry, so I say that twice. So they put their information in. Once we do a quick verification that they are indeed a pantry and it fits our guidelines, which is really simple, they have to be a nonprofit and they have to distribute the food for free. Once that's established, we activate them, and then they suddenly become visible to the growers in their community. And I should say something else. This is, while our target are the 40 million home gardeners, the reality is that gardeners can't garden all year long. In the wintertime, for example. So we designed an iPhone and an Android app for ampleharvest.org. The apps are called Ample Harvest, and they're free. So in the wintertime, if you want to help a pantry out, you can whip out your iPhone or your Android while you're in the supermarket and you see whether it's oranges on sale or maybe it's tuna fish. You can see which pantry is saying they need those things, buy it, and take it directly to the pantry. What we didn't expect, which was really kind of cool, is that pantries started using ampleharvest.org to talk back to the community. So the pantries can now say, hey, we really need this or we really don't want that. So, for example, a pantry in a Jewish or Muslim community might say, please, no pork and beans. Or a pantry in a geriatric community might say, we really need Depends and not diapers. So this is the first time that the pantries can tell the community what's needed, which makes for a much more efficient thing. You're not giving something to a pantry they really don't need.
Right, and that's fantastic. I know that there are about 4,700 food pantries registered.
That keeps going up in real time. The current number is almost 4,800, 4,782 as of this morning.
Wow, and it's only been a couple weeks since I looked, so
Yes.
that's pretty amazing. I checked out in a 15-mile radius of where we're sitting here at Bloomfield College, and I found 27 registered pantries or feeding programs. So I decided to get in touch with the one that was nearest to my own home, and that's Tony's Kitchen in Montclair, New Jersey, which was named for its first cook, Antoinette Tony Green. Tony's Kitchen has operated under St. Luke's Episcopal Church since 1982. So, Anne, thank you for sitting down with me today to talk about Tony's Kitchen.
Thanks for having me.
How many people does your program feed?
We serve between 65 and 85 people a day,
Right.
3 days a week, and then we have a breakfast program on Mondays and Tuesdays.
What kind of change have you seen in your numbers and the constituency of your clients since 2008?
You know, we actually just looked at the trends in our last board meeting, and it was really interesting to look and to see how significantly the numbers have increased. They've almost doubled in the last 5 years. And what we see is much more diversity in the room in terms of ages, as well as the backgrounds of people that are coming. So while we have always served the homeless population and the people who are in very tentative housing situations, we are seeing now more and more people who are living in housing situations that are fairly stable, but whose income has slipped because of the economy. So we're seeing people who used to think of themselves as fairly secure and feeling very insecure, especially retirees.
Are you getting kids?
We are getting kids, but we don't get a lot of kids. We usually have maybe 2 or 3 families at a time that are coming for weeks or maybe a couple months at a time. Kids, we always really look out for them, and we try and make sure that they're connected with services and make sure they're in housing. It's very alarming to see children in a soup kitchen.
In a lot of cases, these are people who have homes, but their income is so limited that the ability to go to a place like Tony's Kitchen or the Salvation Army or one of the religious institutions is the difference between being able to pay the rent or
Sure.
get some medicine or...
Right, pay utilities.
Right.
I mean, people are really struggling. And we have a lot who are what we would call the working poor. So people work for the township. We see them coming in for lunch to supplement their income.
Now, I know that when we spoke earlier, you mentioned that you have a dietitian who plans your meals.
Yes.
And that when you go out and speak to the local groups, you tell them that you have 2 really big needs, protein and fresh produce. To what extent does that produce come from local gardens and gardeners?
Produce is one of the hardest things to get. If we look at the food that we're able to buy, the community food bank, a lot of that food is not high in nutritional content. So we really try and focus on fresh produce and protein. We've learned there are so many more opportunities for produce out there than we're currently able to draw in. We've really tried to draw the community in to our feeding program by giving us their surplus from their gardens. And I think we're at the beginning stages of this. We've had a lot of success with it over the last several summers. People bring us the surplus from their gardens. There are a couple local community gardens that we get produce from, and we actually run a community garden. But the more that we can encourage that and have people think about us when they're planting their garden, as well as when they have a surplus in the garden, the better it is for our guests.
I know this is your 30th anniversary this year.
Yes.
And that Ample Harvest has only been around for a couple of years now. And I also know that you don't track the food donors to your program, but as somebody who's deeply involved in the ecosystem in this community around dealing with food insecurity, you must have a big picture sense of the impact Ample Harvest has had.
Yeah, I think Ample Harvest is just terrific because what it does is it allows people to connect with organizations that need their produce. It has a website where food pantries and soup kitchens can register and say that they would like to participate with people who have surplus in their gardens, but it also just raises awareness that that's an opportunity. So when people are searching online for ways to deal with an overabundance of tomatoes in their gardens, or how to support a food pantry or a soup kitchen, from both of those perspectives, they can easily land on the Ample Harvest website, even if they have no understanding of what Ample Harvest does.
Right.
And in doing that, I think they learn how they can support their neighbors who are hungry and in need in this very meaningful way with something that's really quite simple, which is the abundance of their garden. You know, many of our guests, this is where they're going to get their vegetables. It's going to be at Tony's Kitchen. So if you think of people coming into Tony's Kitchen, they are people oftentimes with compromised immune systems. They don't have robust health, and they don't have access to really healthy food. So when they're in Tony's Kitchen, we feel like we have a very high obligation in terms of nutritional content. It's not just to fill their stomach, it's really to sit down and have a really substantial and nutritious meal, so that when they go out into the rest of their day, where their other meal might be a Dunkin' Donuts because it's very inexpensive, or there may not be another meal, they have some really good nutrition behind them. So that's where I think Ample Harvest plays a role. It really heightens awareness about the need for this kind of support to this fragile community. And it's very practical to see something on Ample Harvest and your neighbor down the street is asking you to tend their garden while they're away on vacation. And it occurs to you, well, maybe I can bring their bounty to the soup kitchen. And it sort of spreads the word without necessarily being directly connected with Ample Harvest. It raises our sort of communal consciousness about that opportunity.
That was Ann Murnan, Director of Outreach for Tony's Kitchen. And Gary, Ann touched on one of your side missions, which has to do with improving nutrition. She talked about how important that is to the people who come to Tony's Kitchen. Can you talk a little bit about that and also about the whole concept of reducing the waste stream?
Oh, absolutely. The funny thing is that the nutritional component of ampleharvest.org is actually something that has a long-term beneficial impact on the country, because so many of the illnesses we're dealing with today, diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, cancer, are in many cases born of the foods that people eat. And by getting healthier food to people, we actually make it a healthier country and reduce our long-term health care costs. It's an interesting note that the opposite of hunger isn't full, it's healthy. And the healthier the food that we get into the system, the healthier our communities are going to be. By extension, by the way, the healthier the planet is going to be. Because when we throw food away in a trash dump, and many people when they have excess food will let it compost, which is great from the standpoint of your garden, but it's bad when people are hungry. But many other people who don't compost or can't throw it in the trash. Well, when you throw food in the trash and it goes to a landfill, it breaks down into methane. A pound of food produces a pound of methane, which is a global warming gas with the impact of 20 pounds of CO2. So you're actually contributing to climate change, to global warming when you throw food away. That's number one. Number two, you're increasing the waste stream, which also means you're increasing your taxes. So if instead that food got to a pantry, you've reduced the methane, you've reduced the waste stream, and you, by the way, have lowered the carbon footprint at the food pantry. So by simply shifting food, excess food from your garden to a pantry, instead of letting it go to waste, the community and the environment both benefit, and at no cost to anybody.
And I know that you've put together some really significant collaborations with everybody from ARP to the USDA to the VFW. Talk about the role they play in helping you accomplish your mission.
We are doing outreach to anybody and everybody across the country, so there are different target audiences. In the case of the VFW, I thought that was a very important thing for us to do early on, because so many veterans, unfortunately, are themselves economically stressed and rely on pantries and shelters. And so if we could get more food into the pantries that benefit our veterans, we'd be taking care of our veterans, but also for those veterans who actually simply are themselves gardeners. So that was an important population to reach. Through the USDA, it's given us access to 95,000 master gardeners across the country. It's also connected us, by the way, to Michelle Obama's Let's Move initiative at the White House.
I wondered about that.
The First Lady has Let's Move, which is a program to get people both eating better and exercising, both. Problem is that if you don't have the money to eat better, you eat the cheapest, not the healthiest calories you can get. So by us getting food into the pantry system that's healthier, we are in effect enabling what she's advocating. So I was actually quite honored to be invited to tour the White House gardens a few months ago, and then actually got to meet the President and First Lady a few weeks ago, which was a personal thrill for me.
And similarly with ARP, as Ann pointed out, so many of the people who come to Tony's Kitchen are elderly people, retired people, who are really stretching to make their budgets fit all of their needs right now, and for some of them that means going to a soup kitchen.
And even for those, by the way, pantry who themselves don't use a food pantry or soup kitchen because they don't need to.
Right.
Many people are just living at the point where they would love to be giving charity, but they don't have the cash to afford the checks or the money.
Right.
AmpleHarvest.org is giving people the opportunity to reach into their backyards instead of their back pockets to help their neighbors in need. This is a whole new way of giving charity to your community without actually giving money. And it's something that's actually sustainable because you can do it year after year after year without spending a dime.
Right. And as Ann said, just plant an extra row.
Yeah.
Now, you made it clear that you really don't have a big organization. You're accomplishing your mission at no cost to any of the participants. Where do you get your funding? Because you have some expenses. You know, you're putting out literature, you've got a website, you've got all this stuff. So,
and we need to hire people, and we started hiring. It is a small organization. It's going to remain a small organization. One of the luxuries AmpleHarvest.org has that we don't have to hire many more people to do a lot more. We are leveraging the internet, but we are looking for donations, and we do go to foundations. It's been a challenge with the foundation realm because AmpleHarvest.org is not your typical anti-hunger initiative. People who usually fund hunger are expecting you to truck food across the country. We're moving information, so it's a foreign concept to many of them, and it's been a challenge. First foundation that actually gave us significant money, of all things, was an environmental organization, the Idelson Fund, not a hunger organization. We're pursuing that money. We need it. But ultimately, the money that AmpleHarvest.org needs to operate is so much less than what normal anti-hunger programs need. Basically, our cost is going to be a rounding error on their budget.
you're approaching your third anniversary, I think,
Yeah.
in May.
Yes.
And I know that you have no measurement tool, but what would you say your impact has been over the 3 years? I mean, Anne had her take on where you fit in this large ecosystem of dealing with food insecurity, but what do you think you've accomplished, and what have you learned along the way?
Wow, two very different questions. What we've accomplished right now is 1 out of every 7 pantries in America is registered on AmpleHarvest.org, which means at this moment 6 out of 7 have not yet registered. My goal by the end of 2013, I'd like to see 10,000 registered on AmpleHarvest.org. What's happened, we've told the pantry world that yes, you can accept fresh food even though you thought you couldn't because you didn't have refrigeration and storage. We've told the gardening world, yes, there's something you can do with your food other than throw it away. The conversation has gotten started and is being promoted. I will say that in 2011 we did do an informal survey that with the food pantries about how much food they got, and this is really informal and probably statistically not perfect by any measure, but it's looking like well over 20 million pounds of food actually came in, which I thought was a very, very good amount. Ultimately, if 1 out of every 10 gardeners in America donated 2 shopping bags, about
Right.
50 pounds of food a year, and the average gardener, by the way, grows around 300 pounds. We'd be looking at 200 million pounds of food, fresh food coming into the system, which is really important, not just to feed people, but to educate our kids. Because if we start to get kids to understand that apples don't come pre-sliced in cellophane and peas come in pods and not cans, they're going to be actually eating better. In terms of the impact, one note here I have from a pantry manager. She talks about that the people, when they come in, really go for the fresh food first. Her comment was the turnips were flying out the door yesterday. That's right. The very same turnips that people usually sit in a grocery store unloved were being taken. When you get fresh food in a pantry, that's the first thing to go. That's how much the people really do want to have it. What I've learned about this is that we have problems in America that are not insurmountable. We can make a difference, and we can solve a lot of them by simply using what's using in our backyards. And it means that neighbors can take care of neighborhoods rather than having Washington or the state government have to be doing all the heavy lifting. Our communities used to be farmland, especially prior to World War I and World War II.
Right.
Then we built suburbs out of them. We now have the opportunity to take a little bit of that back in terms of your backyard and turn it back into land feeding America.
When we spoke earlier, you said that if you solve a problem, take a bow and go away. Do you see that happening anytime soon with regard to AmpleHarvest.org?
I'd love to say yes. The answer is probably not in the imminent future. Ultimately, a charity, if it does the right thing, should solve the problem and bow out. Look, I mean, there's no more foundations right now asking for money for smallpox. Smallpox has been largely eradicated, and it's gone. When we eradicate hunger and malnutrition in America, I think that AmpleHarvest.org's mission will have been completed. It's going to take a while. We have 40 million people to educate. We have a lot of pantries to get set up. So in the interim, we have a lot of work to do, and we could use all the help we can get.
And I think that we should send our listeners to ampleharvest.org here in New Jersey. Tony's Kitchen is in Montclair, and as I said, there are some 27 food pantries and food banks within 15 miles of where we're sitting today. So if you're out there, there's plenty that you can do.
Gardens at home grew more food at a certain point than we could use. My wife reached a point where she said, don't bring any more of that in the house. And so I went out looking for where can I donate the food to. I knew there was a battered women's shelter in our town. I'm in West Milford, New Jersey. So I contacted them and said, would you like some produce? And they said, we'd love it. So I took it over there, and a lady answered the door, and she took the stuff. And she was very gracious about it, and she said, thank you. And as I'm walking away, she says, this is great. Now we can have some fresh food. And I thought that was a very odd thing for someone to say. It never crossed my mind that fresh food was something that they wouldn't normally have. A year later, I went back to the same shelter. I also had more food than we can use. I gave her some more. Same lady answered the door and same comment. So I started to become aware of the fact that food pantries and shelters don't have fresh food. Jump forward a year, in 2008, the folks at Sustainable West Milford, who run the community garden in West Milford, New Jersey, asked me to take over the directorship of the community garden. It had been around for 2 years previously. The woman who created it was going on to other endeavors, and I said, sure, I'll be happy to. So in meeting with the people in late '08, just to get the feel of the garden and meet the people, they said, you know, it's really frustrating at the end of the year. There's a lot of food left in the garden. People are going on vacation, they get bored, they get overwhelmed, and this just rolled off my tongue. I said, you know, if we have an ample harvest, the least we can do is give it to people who need it. I had no idea where that was going to take me. So they loved the idea. They set about to put a committee together to organize it, and I set about, as the director of the garden, to find places in town to donate the food to.
Yeah.
I went on Google, which is what any geek would do, and found out that Google said the
Welcome to a new edition of DIY World Improvement. I'm your host, Catherine Carlozzi. Today is Groundhog's Day. If you're a backyard gardener, you may not be so fond of the furry varmints, but they probably aren't your only problem. I suspect you found yourself overrun by rhubarb or with squash to squander. Well, stay tuned, because today's do-it-yourself world improver, Gary Oppenheimer, has the answer to your overabundance issues. Back in the day, Gary was a self-described computer geek involved with sales and support for MCI's fledgling email service. Remember, once upon a time, there wasn't email. He was a big deadhead back in the day, and he also produced what may be the very first e-zine while living and working from a boat in the Hudson River. About 10 years ago, Gary moved to the Garden State, traded his boat hook for a hoe, and took up gardening. His new passion led him to become a Rutgers Master Gardener and complete the school's Environmental Stewards program. 3 years ago, Gary had an epiphany that resulted in the founding of ampleharvest.org. Ample Harvest addresses the growing issue of food insecurity by linking America's 40 million plus home gardeners with food pantries. As a side benefit, it helps reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the waste stream, and the American waistline. Gary has received bushel baskets full of accolades. Among others, he's been named a CNN Hero and was a recent guest of the White House. A frequent speaker, he was featured at the TEDx Manhattan conference, Changing the Way We Eat, on January 21st. Gary, welcome to DIY World Improvement. We're delighted you could come to the studio today.
Thank you very much for that lovely lead-in.
Tell us how a guy who lived on a boat in the middle of the Hudson River up there at the 79th Street Boat Basin reached that aha moment that resulted in creating ampleharvest.org.
It actually started a long time before that. In the 1950s, when I was a young child, my grandmother kept on saying, finish what's on your plate, kids are starving in Europe. So from an early age, I was attuned to the need not to waste food and that other people were suffering from the lack of food. And I've always grown up hating waste. And that's just been through my life, whether it's wasted time, wasted energy, wasted food, or wasted money. But the ampleharvest.org itself came about in two phases. One is with myself as a master gardener, having my own